Welcome on in, golf fans. It's your boy Gsluke here with our round 2 live stream for the Procore Championship. Going to quickly break down what to expect from the golf course tomorrow, as well as how to attack the Showdown slate out there for Friday, as well as some of your prop slips on Underdog and Prize Picks. So first off, hopefully you're having a fantastic Thursday. We got some Thursday Night Football on, which I'm watching just over my shoulder. So if you see me trying to watch that out of the corner of my eye, that's what I'm keeping an eye on. We've got a little bit of a sweat going on in single entry, so hopefully that goes our way. A few prop slips that I'm out there sweating as well, so definitely going to have one eye on that. But in this live stream here, going to break down all the information out there for tomorrow. So again, hopefully you guys are having a fantastic evening and ready to talk some golf out there for Friday. Before we go ahead and deep dive everything for tomorrow's action, I do want to remind you of the presenting sponsor of this live stream, which of course are our friends over there at the Ship It Nation. They are a great resource for all your needs when it comes to DFS, not just what we talk about here with golf and football. So if you're somebody that plays baseball DFS, UFC DFS, which a pretty big card out there for Saturday's action this weekend, any of the sports that you see listed on the graphic above, make sure to go ahead and check them out. They're a great all-encompassing site that's not going to cost you an arm and a leg to go out there and join. They're very reasonable with their price tags over there. A lot of great content with projections and process-based tips. So a great partner with the channel. Proud to have them on the channel as one of our presenting sponsors. And make sure to use code Luke10 when you guys are signing up, and you will get a discount off any membership on that end. But in terms of Showdown out here for round 2, I think we're going to have a decent edge out here for Friday, because if you took a look at the scoring out here from Thursday, well, we expected there to be a difference between the morning and afternoon scoring. Personally, I didn't think it was going to be an entire shot difference. Part of that came down to the winds that kicked up as the day went on, but even more so came down to the firmness of the golf course, which got pretty rock hard towards the end of the day. So if you take a look at the actual observed weather from today, see from about 2 to 5 p.m. is when the winds were really cranking. But even before the wind kicked up and even after the wind kicked out towards the last few hours of play today, the scores were a lot harder than what you had at the morning wave. So out here, when we take a look at this Friday forecast, you see that once again, it's going to be a little bit cooler in the morning, but as the day goes on, the sustained winds and those wind gusts get up there a little bit. Now, for Thursday's forecast, they weren't calling for anything over like 12 miles an hour, ended up being a little bit more significant, as you saw with that 15 miles an hour sustained the whole way through 3 through 5 p.m. So even though it only says there's going to be like 9, maybe 10, 11 miles an hour wind out there, I would venture to say that it's going to be pretty similar to what we had today. And even if it was only half the weather edge that we had out there for round 1, it was nearly a 1-stroke difference between the morning and the afternoon. There's still a little bit of play going on, so obviously these numbers are going to shift a little bit in one direction or the other. But even if it's only about half the difference of what we had out there for today, let's say it's like a 0.4 or a 0.5 shot difference, that is going to be massive out there for our lineup. So that's why I think that there could be an advantage tomorrow to going out there and only playing some AM wave golfers. The one thing that I'll say about this weather angle is that the later tee time that you can get out there in the morning wave, I think the better that you're going to get, because the wind gusts are going to be low for most of the play out there in the morning, but the temperature is the one aspect working against players. For maybe the first hour and a half, 2 hours of play, it looks like it's going to be a little bit cooler out there. So ideally, I would say I would want guys starting towards like maybe 8:30, 9 a.m. local time, which if we go over here to the tee time sheet, we can show you what those players would look like. So let's switch this to round 2. It's also changed this to local time. So we're looking at it from the player's perspective over there on site. And you'll see that you have some 7 a.m. starters, right? Probably starting when the golf course is a little bit cooler. But if you're starting around this like 8:30 zone, so like the Patton Kazires, we got Ryan Moore there, Sam Stevens, who we're going to talk about as one of our plays here in a few minutes. But really anyone from, let's say, like this Luke Clanton group up, even these like Ben James, the Trace Crows down here, Parker Cooties of the world, are all going to have pretty ideal conditions out there for tomorrow. I would still rather have some of these earlier starters than the PM players to begin with. So even if you're starting at like 7:40 local time over there, even like 8 a.m., right, an hour before the ideal tee times, I would much rather have this section of the players than the guys going off later, when it's going to be a lot firmer of a golf course than what we've had for the first half of play, and what led to that entire stroke difference out there in round number 1. So again, this is going to change a little bit. Might not be an entire stroke difference when it's all said and done, but even if it is that half a stroke difference, I think that's going to matter out there for Friday. So let's bring up our projections. As I said, we're going to keep this one moving a little bit quickly as we do have the football going on. Also, a really quick turnaround with how late this round is going to end. And I just want to talk through our strategy, which for round 2 showdown is not going to be rocket science. We're going to use that weather edge that I just talked about with you guys. And then we're also going to incorporate some game theory. And towards the top end of the board, I don't think everyone has to be a pivot. So that's part of the reason why I want to point out a Luke Clanton here, as he's maybe going to be a little bit higher owned than all the other guys that we talk about here. But then we're also going to have guys like Brendan Todd that I bring up. They're going to be much lower owned in leverage pieces towards the top end of the board. So I don't think a weather edge is enough to go out there and make tomorrow profitable. If you take that weather edge, you incorporate a little bit of game theory on top of that, is where I think you're going to find the nuts out there. So let's catch up on chat. What's going on, Mark? Do I think Maverick has a small shot of making the cut? Yeah, of course he does. Just looking at the shot tracker, it looked like he was having putting issues. Yeah, in terms of shots gained, tee to green wasn't all that bad. And yeah, one round isn't going to keep you out of it, Bart. He gets to -1, he probably makes the cut. So yeah, to answer your question, he definitely has a chance to go out there and make it. But the players that I prefer, I'm not going to count on that out there from Mav, as he's got a PMT time, right? I'd much rather play a Luke Clanton even at higher ownership, because he's only $9,500. He hit the ball beautifully out there. Still finishing his round, actually, as we're out here discussing here on live stream. But I've got him projected for the highest fantasy points of any player on the slate, because we don't have many AM guys to choose from. If you're going to try and play that weather edge like I am out here for Friday, you've got Corey Connors, you've got Luke Clanton, in terms of the guys that are 90, 200 and above. You've also got guys like Brendan Todd, a Minwoo to choose from towards the bottom end of the 9K range. But that's 4 players, $9,000 plus, that are going to have that kind of tee time we're looking for. And there's 6 players from that price tag that are going to be in the bad wave, right? The PM side of tee times. So I think up top, I'm much more worried about just trying to play the guys that are in the best weather than going out there and trying to take like the Sahith, Wyndham Clarks, or even Max Homa's down here at $9,400. While they're probably the best players in this field, they're going to be high owned. I still have all of those guys, especially Clark and Thigala. They're the 2 highest owned players out there on the entire slate. And even a Max Homa at nearly about 20% ownership out there for Friday. So I don't think you're really going to get cute with taking any of those players, which sometimes you might be able to go out there, play guys in the PM wave at slightly lower ownership. But because there's only 4 guys from $9,000 plus that you can take from the AM wave, you're going to get people that are playing some of these PM wave players. And personally, I'm just going to exclude all of them from my player pool, just based on the weather edge alone. So I'm not going to go too crazy when it comes to taking guys out of the quote unquote bad wave. I guess you could, a few of them could get there even with slightly harder conditions, but you're playing with a handicap at that point. You've got about a half a stroke, maybe even an entire stroke to go out there and overcome, which isn't possible, of course, right? If you're going to go out there and shoot -8, I guess that's the difference between shooting -8 and -7. It's still going to be a great round, however you go ahead and chalk that up. But I'd rather have the guys that are getting a stroke advantage as opposed to having to go out there and spot it to the rest of the field. So that's my take out here in round 2 showdown. You see somebody like Brendan Todd to be a lot lower owned. A lot of this comes down to their current score and how they've scored over Thursday's action. We get a bunch of overreactions out here after the first round. And that's why I think guys like Todd can make a little bit of sense. Even a Mackenzie Hughes, who didn't have a bad round by any means, are going to be a little bit lower owned than players that had a slightly better score. For example, a Minwoo Lee, going to be pretty chalky out there. Luke Clanton, as I mentioned, right, getting quite a bit of attention himself. Those AM wave golfers that went out there and crushed it in round 1 are going to get quite a bit of steam out there in round 2 showdown contests. Between the fact that they played well, also the fact that they're on the quote unquote better side of tee times is going to juice up their ownership quite a bit. So while I do like my, guys like Clanton that I'm taking at nearly 30%, you better have some guys like Todd and Mackenzie Hughes mixed in to go out there and try and offset some of that ownership. Moving down a little bit further, I guess it's worth noting that JJ Spawn is going to be pretty chalky. Who else? Mac Meissner getting a pretty good amount of ownership himself. But guys that I like would be a Sam Stevens down here at sub 5%. I've got him projecting in that same sort of range when it comes to his projected points, maybe a little bit lower than some of the other chalkier options here, but he's got just as much, if not higher upside when it comes to a single round than the other guys over there in the 8K range and the guys that are more popular than a Sam Stevens. The reason why I say he has more single round upside is that he's got an extremely wide range of outcomes. He's a very aggressive player. He's not afraid at all to go out there and blow up from round to round. But when Sam Stevens has his best stuff, he oftentimes goes out there and nukes for a 4 or 5 under par round. So that's the kind of player that I'm looking for in Showdown. Give me a low owned, high upside player on the right side of the draw, and that's really enough for me to go out there and get some exposure. I think some people, when they're playing Showdown, think that it has to be rocket science when you're going out there and selecting plays, but in reality, there's only a few things that you really should be looking for. Ownership, game theory is probably the number one thing you should be considering when you're looking at a play, but on top of that, tee time, weather edge, right? That's something that we've talked about plenty to this stage of the live stream. But on top of that, it's upside and then it's ball striking stats. Did they hit the ball well out there on Thursday? If they did, that's a plus. Or are they a player that is a really wide range of outcomes that can go out there and spike a performance into the positive? If they can check, let's say 3 of those 4 boxes, or even just 2 out of those 4 boxes, I think they should be in consideration out there for your round 2 Showdown. I also got a Michael Thorbjornsen. I've got it sub 5%. Didn't have an amazing start out there on Thursday, but does have the AMT time, a player that I thought was really going to tear up this golf course. So why not take him out there in a few lineups? He's sub 5%. That would be low owned in comparison to some of the other guys in this range. Andrew Putnam, for example, is just under 10% out there in the bad wave. You've got other players here that had slightly better rounds that I've got at double the ownership of somebody like a Thorbjornsen. And I would argue that he's the better player long-term than a lot of those other chalkier players. And he's on the better side of tee times. So why not take a shot on him at a lowish ownership? I don't want to say non-existent ownership because 5% is definitely more than 0, but still a lot lower than some of those other chalky players. John Kiefer, a player that I've heard a lot of good things about, his scoring average on the, PGA Tour Americas, one of the, I guess, minor league tours, you could say, out there for the PGA Tour action. He's averaging 66 strokes per round out there on that tour. Out of his 10 starts, I didn't know this heading into the week, he had 9 top 10 finishes and 4 runner-ups and 1 win out there on his 10 starts. So yeah, you do the math, right? Half the time he was finishing in the top 2, and he was finishing top 10 in 9 out of those 10 starts, which is just absurd consistency. I don't care if it's the PGA Tour Americas, right? Like it's a lower tier talent level. Going out there and dominating like that, it means something, right? So he's the kind of guy that I probably, and actually didn't at all, go out there and play for main slate. But in a Showdown format, when you just got to go out there and do it for 18 holes, give me one of these high upside players. And by the way, I did a little bit of a deep diving out there on some of his results, as you could probably tell with the research that I had on him. And the scores for those events on the PGA Tour Americas are like 22 to 25 under par. So what that tells me about Kiefer is if he's consistently finishing in the top 10 over there, is that the guy can score, right? You're not going to finish in the top 10 of an event where 15 to 20 under par is what's going to take to finish top 10, unless you're comfortable with going low. So I like that kind of play for Showdown. We haven't seen him that much out there, but if he's going to be that aggressive sort of mindset player, that reminds me a lot of a Thorbjornsen or Sam Stevens, who of course I'm also taking out there in my lineups. And a few other guys I want to point out, I think these are the last 2 plays we're going to go for highlighted plays on here. It'd be a Joel Damon, who did have a really good round today. So I know I've got him over here at about 4% ownership, but when I do my second set of projections, which by the way, I'm going to run those after we get off live stream here. I got to add the current score tab out there for my Patreon members. I've also got to update some of these ownership numbers. Damon's likely going to go up to at least like 5, maybe even 6% ownership. He had one of the better rounds of anyone in the field today. Really hit the ball well in the small sample size that I was looking at. AMT time, it fits this golf course to a T. You've seen him play really well at Silverado in the past. And in terms of projection points per dollar, this 5.3x over here is a lot better than the other guys in this range. So I like him. Some Pearson Cootie, also a little bit chalkier. I would say that some of that ownership I'm going to have to give to Damon might come away from Pearson Cootie here at 5.1%. So if Damon's ownership is going to go up out there in my next set of projections, it's going to come from a variety of different players in this range. But one of the guys that's going to go down would be a Pearson Coody. And Coody, just like a Joel Damon, does have that AMT time going for him. But on top of that, also really hit the ball well today. Just could not make any putts from what I could see out there. Small sample size. I'm going to have to recheck the shots gained metrics after we get off live stream as well, as there was still a few more holes to go for some of these players. But a Pearson Coody, notoriously an aggressive player, somebody that will go pin hunting out there and has that wide range of outcomes that I'm looking for. Outside of that, those are the only highlighted plays that I wanted to go through. Again, going to try and keep this one moving a little bit quicker. Now let's talk through some lineup construction stuff. So I'm going to bring up Draftkings. We'll talk through my thought process when building lineups, which you're going to add in the weather edge. We're going to add some game theory on top of that. And that's really all it's going to take to go out there and build some solid lineups. You got 30% Kiefer for main slate. Yeah, that was a bold take, that's for sure. He was a lot higher owned in the higher dollar stuff than I was expecting. And in fact, I think the $200 single entry I entered was like 22% owned. So yeah, I don't even think you had that much leverage in those kind of contests at 30%. I wasn't going to do that, that's for sure. I think he's more of a showdown guy. We'll have to see. Maybe he does kill it for all 4 rounds. But those like Corn Ferry Tour guys that come up, they're usually like first round leader or showdown sort of plays. Like that guy, De La Fuente, right? He went out there, he shot like 58 on the Corn Ferry or something like that. He's the perfect showdown sort of play. He's shown that in his small sample size as well. So we'll have to see. The jury's still out on him, and he looks like a stud, that's for sure. What's going on, Joseph? Hopefully you're having a solid evening. But let's build a lineup or two here together. So this is going to be out there for the large field GPP. And I guess what I'm going to show you is even if you're using like a 30% of Luke Clanton start, it's not going to be the end all be all. You can still make your lineups work, especially if you're trying to jam in another low end option up top. And I think one way I'm going to do that would be to start with a Corey Connors and then a Clanton as my second man in. Corey Connors, because he is currently over par, is going to be a lot lower owned than some people were expecting. And he was mega chalk heading into this week. He was well over the 20% mark out there in GPPs, which I guess makes sense. He does kind of fit the build of what you're looking for in a golfer around here, but I wasn't nearly as high on him as other people out there in the industry. So I didn't have to, bear the brunt of that really poor performance today. But in round 2 showdown, if you're giving me a little bit of a discount on that ownership, and we can take a little bit of a double spend up here and try and get different with our lineup construction, I think that this is a very attractive way to start a lineup. You've got the 2 AM players to start, also a combination that I don't think will be that highly owned, because if you're going to take Clanton as a second man in, a lot of people would rather use a Wyndham Clark. It's only $300 more. I know he's in the PM wave, but a lot of people would just rather go that direction. This way, we're still preserving that weather edge that I mentioned. And at the same time, we're also getting a slightly lower owned combination there. Moving a little bit further down the board, our third man in is probably going to be in this 8K range, at least if you want to be somewhat balanced about how we're using our salary. I don't hate a Mackenzie Hughes AMT time, so let's go ahead and just plug them into the lineup. It's not so much who we're clicking here, but more so the ownership trends that I want you guys to keep an eye on from the lineup construction segment. Down here in the 7K range, we still want to keep ownership relatively low. So yeah, chalky Clanton, but I would say average owns Corey Connors, average owns out there with Mackenzie Hughes. We still got to find some pivots, right? So Michael Thorbjornsen, I mentioned, could be one of those pivots that you get to. Kiefer is relatively low owned. You could also use him for a little bit of leverage. And as long as your last man in here isn't going to be like a Martin Laird, who's going to be like 5 to 7.5% owned, as long as your last guy here is sub 5%, I'd feel really comfortable out there with this kind of lineup composition. So that's what I'll say about your lineups. Even if you start with a 30% owned player, Corey Connors is like 15, 20%. Mackenzie Hughes is like 12 to 15% himself. Actually, what was Hughes? Let me double check on that ownership number. He was 14.4% out there in lineups. You're starting with 3 guys that have got some ownership that you certainly wouldn't call like diamonds of the rough by any means, but you can still feel pretty confident about this in a large field GPP if your last few spots are different. Now, if you started with this core combination of 3 players up top, and then your last 3 were chalkier, well, this is where it would become an issue, right? So if you went Martin Laird, who, like I said, at -6 is going to get quite a bit of attention out there. Even if you used Troy Merritt, who was only in T22 at this point, he's going to get more attention than some of the other players that we pointed out. And at $7,600, maybe you would use Schmid in a chalkier version. This lineup would not be okay out there in the large field GPP. And it's really not all that different, right? If anything, guys, by the way, the 3 players that we took that were lower owned, I project better than those 3 options that I mixed in there. Not all of those guys were even AM wave golfers. And on top of that, they're guys that are slap dicks that just played way above their baseline round 1. And that's why people are going to them out there in round 2. If anything, those guys are due for a little bit of negative regression. Regression back to their mean, their average performance, which is usually a lot worse than what we saw for round 1. So that's what I'll say about your lineup construction, is that it, just like I said, for your process in selecting players, it does not need to be overly complicated. You don't need to be out there thinking that you're, like Heisenberg or Einstein out there in the lab trying to put together lineups. It's a lot more straightforward than a lot of you would think. That's even for the large field GPPs where you're really considering ownership. Single entries, you can tone it down even more when it comes to your process. So really just having that standardized process to begin with is really the entire battle to begin with, because once you get that down, it's just going out there and rinsing and repeating on those basics, on those fundamentals that we talk about here in the live stream. So when you're going out there and building, I would say just make sure you have at least 2 sub 5 percenters out there in every lineup that you're going with. If you have 3 sub 5 percenters, then you're 100% going to be fine. Hell, you could have 3 chalky guys to start and then 3 sub 5 percenters to round out that lineup, and you'd be totally fine in the large field GPP for tomorrow. So go with that as a baseline, at least 2 pivots in every lineup, if not 3. And I think you'll do pretty good in getting the differentiation and the uniqueness that you're looking for in your builds. In terms of cash, single entries, as I mentioned, that's where you start to tone it down a little bit. But outside of that, that's all I've got for the DFS side. Cam Champ battled back, Zach Jeffer said, from the early +3 start. He said, any interest, and sorry that you pressed enter accidentally. I don't have a ton of interest. He is a AMT time though, right? Let me see. Yeah, he's an AMT time. He's not a horrible play by any means. What I would say about Cameron Champ that would make me think that he's a decent option for tomorrow is the course history, right? He's won around a Silverado before. Form is okay. He's gaining a half a stroke per round to the field over his last 12 measured rounds. And like you said, some positive momentum. So yeah, that's 3 check marks out there for Cameron Champ. In fact, let me check my projections. I don't know off the top of my head whether I had him in my first set, but I can just double check for you real quick and let you know. Let me see. So Cam Champ, I don't have in my first set, but now after you've pointed him out, I have to go back and redo some of my projections afterwards. It's a good chance that he's going to get added to the player pool because, I mean, I just gave you the idea there, right? Course history, some form heading in, low owned. I've also got him well under 5% projected ownership. It's not a bad play at all. So I think that's a very sharp take, man. Let's hop over to the prop side now. So let me bring up Underdog. Price Picks. We might not have boards yet as the play is still going on. So there's a good chance that we don't have them posted. If that's the case, I'm going to give you guys more of a game plan out there for tomorrow. So of course, guys, the spreadsheet that you saw with all my projections, my entire player pool is posted over there on my Patreon page. Same thing with the prop slips as we're going to get to them. But it does look like we have some LIV Golf stuff posted, also some Euro Golf that I guess we could look at. So yeah, no PGA stuff posted as you'd expect with play just finishing up right now. But let's take a look at the LIV Golf stuff. So they only have birdie or better matchups posted, which I guess makes sense given that this is a brand new golf course, one that I don't believe that we've seen before over there on the LIV side. In fact, I haven't done any research for LIV Golf yet. So it'd be good to figure out the name of the golf course that they're playing at, but I know it's a new one that they're going to. So it's not going to be much help for us to try and figure it out. It's called Bolingbrook Golf Club. I guess I'll share my screen so you guys can see what we're looking at here. Let's see if we can find some course details. I knew nothing about this place because this is a brand new golf course. I don't believe it was played on the PGA Tour. At least doesn't, ring a bell at first glance. It's a 7,100 yard par 70. So in terms of your length for a par 70, that's maybe a little shorter than average, but if anything, probably like average length. I mean, they've got a pretty beefy par 3 right here, 231 yards. I'm just kind of trying to get a test for like what players are going to play well here, because with birdie or better matchups, right? It's the only category that we have to look at. I mean, there's only so much that we can do, right? It's a matchup. It's not like we're playing against the golf course. It's not like a strokes line where we're trying to figure out how hard or easy it's going to play. If you're going to try and find some value between these birdie or better matchups, Usually do it with birdie rate. You just look at raw birdie percentage, which we'll do over there on the LIV Golf site. And then you try and do it based on skill set too. Sometimes one player might really set up for a golf course well, as opposed to their opponent. He might be a little bit behind the 8 ball at any given golf course. So let's see what we've got. Looks like a potentially drivable par 4, a couple shorter par 3s, some, I say a really good mix of holes is what I'm looking at here, because, hole number 1 looks like dreadful, 500-yard par 4. That looks really tough. Hole 4 looks like a real tough long hole. Same thing with hole 12 here at 494 yards. But then you have a bunch of these shorter par 4s too, like 400, sub 400 out there with 2 in hole number 5. You've got a 150-yard par 3, another one over there at hole 13, potentially drivable one that we pointed out there before. I don't know if this really does, at least based on what we're seeing right here, really favor one sort of player. We can take a look at the overhead map. I guess we can see the kind of water that they have in play. Hole 6 is an island green. Okay, that's interesting. That'll be a pretty fun hole to watch. 17 is a tough par 3. It looks like it's tucked just over the water, and a lot more water in play than I'd think for a golf course up there in Chicago. So that's I guess interesting to know. But in terms of birdie or better matchups, let's try and translate that into an actual slip here. And maybe we'll get a board posted on one of these sites after we look through some of this LIV Golf stuff. So if you guys are not that interested in the LIV Golf stuff, I guess just hang tight for us here for a few minutes before we can start to look at some of the PGA stuff, which even if we don't have a board to go through, I am going to give you guys a little bit of a game plan over there. So what I like to do for these matchups, you can see I bring up the birdie list, just the raw birdie average out here for LIV Golf this year. And they sort it by, I believe, birdies made, which is ridiculous. That's not really helpful at all. The thing that we're worried about is this average to the right? Obviously, their total birdies divided by the amount of rounds that they've played. And first off, to see what we can use for some research, okay, none of those top tier ones really stand out. I guess DJ versus Burmester. We can look at that one. So DJ's number 10, Burmester's number 20. So maybe you would side towards DJ in that scenario. Let's see what else we have on here. Oosthuizen versus Reed. They have the same matchup twice, with just each player covering the other one. Reed's number 21, and Oosthuizen would be number 12 on the PGA, on the LIV Tour, I would say. You can see he averages about 4.65 birdies per round. Patrick Reed is about 0.5 lower. So, just like DJ, who's at 4.42, as opposed to, what was it, Burmester that he was against? Yeah, Burmester down here at like 4.2 per round. That second one that we're looking at, this Oosthuizen versus Reed one, as an even bigger differential in terms of their birdie average. So this might actually be a look. You could either make this the over on Patrick Reed or the under on Louis Oosthuizen, and that one would work out. So let's just do the Oosthuizen over for now, rather than the Patrick Reed under on this birdie or better matchup. And let's look through the rest of this. So Bland versus Na, that could be one actually. So Richard Bland, you wouldn't expect this, but he's averaging 4.42. Birdies are better per round. Kevin Na, not so much. Kevin Na's down here at 3.94. So how big is that difference? 3.94 as opposed to 4.42. That's nearly a 0.5 birdie difference, which doesn't sound all that massive, but it is, especially over an entire season sample size like what we're looking at. So that could be a lean, this Richard Bland over Kevin Na. What about Ortiz versus Lahiri? That could be another one, because Ortiz, another guy, because I know from doing some of the research over here, Ortiz is number 16 on the tour in birdie percentage, 4.31, which is pretty decent. And then his matchup here, Lahiri, he's been a little bit better recently at making birdies, but for the year, Lahiri's down at number 41 on tour, 3.58 per round. So 3.58 as opposed to what for Ortiz? Yeah, 4.31. That one is the most egregiously priced out of all of them, right? That's well over a 0.5 birdie difference. Let's see what else we can work with. Kokrak versus Leishman, that's probably pretty even, just what I know from their averages. Let's look at Leishman versus Tringale. Tringale has been really good this year, 4.44 per round. I knew we were going to see that. What I'm going to look at now is the Leishman. The Leishman's been a little bit better recently. In fact, a lot better recently than what I can remember. So he's actually over a 4 average. So you probably stay away from that one, especially because he's in form right now. And then the last one was Tringale versus, that's definitely going to be a lean. Look at this. Varner's averaging 3.64 per round. Tringale, he's the matchup, right? It's against Tringale. Yeah, Tringale is up here at well over 4 per round. In fact, 4.44. So if we were going to pick the best two out of all of these, we take out the Usti versus Reed. It would be these bottom two and then this Richard Bland one. In fact, this is probably good enough to go ahead and mix in. So I'm going to take these two out here for a slip. Birdie Better matchups, not my favorite props to go through, but you could see the thought process over here, right? Carlos Ortiz has Lahiri beat by, let's do the math again. Ortiz was down here at 4.31. Lahiri, is that, yes, against Lahiri is down here at 3.58. So 4.2 plus 3.1. That's a 0.73 birdie difference. That's substantial right there. It's nearly 3/4 of a birdie per round. And then the Tringale one, 4.44, and then minus, holy shit. So 0.44, and then Harold Varner III, the whole way down here. Horrible season. That one is a 0.8 birdie difference out there between those two players. So that's the thought process with getting to those two. Now I guess let's talk about the strategy out there with props. So out here for round two, I think it's real simple. If we're going to get boards that are priced evenly for the AM and PM wave, I think we can take some unders on strokes or overs on birdies for morning guys and some overs on strokes or unders on birdies out there for the guys in the PM wave. Self-explanatory, right? It was a one-shot difference between the two waves today. It might not be an entire stroke difference, but even if it's only like a half a stroke to 0.75 stroke difference, that is going to matter out there from the prop perspective. So especially on a site like Underdog, which by the way, I actually didn't bring up Underdog. Maybe they do have some stuff posted where you can get an extra or boosted payout by going out there and anti-correlating. It would be a damn good idea to go out there and try and attack against some positive stance plays early and then maybe some fades towards the end of the day. So unfortunately, we don't have those props posted, but that's what I would do out there. And I guess just to give you guys some like numbers I'd be looking for, pin locations, right? We haven't been able to look at those either, but some 4.5 birdies for some of the best players out there in the field. If you can give me an AM time, like maybe a Luke Clanton at like 4.5 birdies, maybe I'd consider taking that for an over. Who else? Minwoo Lee is going off early, right? He's one of the better players. Had a really good round today, just like Luke Clanton. You give me those kind of guys at 4.5 birdies, I'm probably going to consider taking their over. In terms of strokes, probably 69.5 strokes is what I'm looking for in a lot of those elite tier players. You give me 69.5 on, one of those two guys that I mentioned, I'll probably consider taking their unders on strokes as well. Now for the PM fades, if they have some 2.5 bogey lines out there on either site, you give me a slappy playing it in the PM, I'll take them for an over at 2.5 bogeys. For birdies are better. You give me a really shitty player at 4.5 birdies, which I would say Prize Picks probably not going to post crappy players at 4.5 birdies, but Underdog might. They're known for posting birdies a little bit higher than they probably should. If they do that, I'll take some unders at 4.5 for some of those PM players. So I don't want to give the lines makers everything that I'm looking for because they'll probably make sure that I don't see it out there with the projections, but that's what I'm looking at in terms of my exposure. So as I mentioned before, Patreon page is the place to be to go out there and get all of that exposure. But let's catch up on any last second questions and then hop on out of here. What's going on, Antonio? What are my thoughts on the course? It's one of your favorites, very underrated. I don't know if it would hold a major. I don't know if I'd go that far, Antonio. I'm at like a 4 out of 10 on it. I'd say it's like maybe slightly worse than average based on what I'm looking at, but I enjoy the novelty of it. I would say that a golf course that does the same kind of thing as what you get here, but I think does it in a better way would be Harbor Town, right? Harbor Town, in my opinion, is tighter off the tee. You have to be a lot more creative with the overhanging branches, and it's trying to accomplish the same thing as the Napa Valley. So I would say if we're going to have one of those courses hold a major, I think I'd rather have Harbor Town do it. But I get what you're saying. I like these kind of courses. It opens up the field so much that anyone can win, and that's a lot of fun, especially with going out there and betting. You just joined late, but what am I doing with Homa? He looks pretty good. So yeah, the issue for me is the AM versus PM split. If he was in the AM wave, I'd probably be playing him out there for round 2 showdown because what you said was spot on. He looked a lot better, especially in his last 9 holes out there for round 1. So this is the issue, right? Morning wave played so much easier than the PM that tomorrow he's on the wrong side of tee time. So in general, I hope that he has a really good day because I played him in a lot of main slate lineups, but that's the one tough thing I would say about it. All right, we're going to hop on out of here, guys. I'm going to watch the end of this game, get my little single entry sweat going over there for NFL. But I appreciate everyone stopping by as usual, showing love out there on the content. Go ahead, smash that like button if you guys haven't already, and also subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of the content over the rest of the weekend. Rounds 3 and 4, we're going to have it covered for all of that, and as well the main slate out there for NFL DFS. So make sure to keep an eye out for all of that when it drops, and best of luck whether you've got some Thursday night stuff that you're out there spending tonight. Best of luck with all of your golf exposure over the weekend, and we'll have fun with it. Best of luck out there, and let's take down a GPP or two.